Today's story will cover the topic about weed. Welcome, dear listeners, to Go to Sleep Historian, the place where history drifts softly into the quiet of night. Thank you for joining us this evening. If you enjoy these calm journeys through time, please remember to subscribe and support the channel. Your subscription helps us continue bringing peaceful, carefully told stories from the forgotten corners of history. Tonight, we explore a story that begins not with a king or a conqueror, but with a plant, a small green leaf that has healed, inspired, and quietly challenged humanity for thousands of years. We begin in ancient fires, where people first tossed hemp into the flames and watched strange smoke rise into the night. We'll travel through temples and trade routes, across empires, and into the modern world to discover how cannabis became medicine, myth, and controversy. This is not a story about politics or crime. It's a story about curiosity, about the long human search for calm, connection, and meaning. So find a comfortable place, let your thoughts slow down, and listen as we trace the journey of one of the world's oldest companions. The story of when people first started smoking weed. The first flame. Humanity meets the green leaf. We begin not with a philosopher or a conqueror, but with a plant that's been confusing, healing, and mildly annoying governance for thousands of years. Cannabis. Long before the word weed ever existed, before governments and rules, before there were even cities to govern, this humble green leaf was already weaving itself quietly into the story of humankind. It never asked for worship, or fear, or even attention. It simply gray in valleys, beside rivers, under endless skies, patiently waiting for someone to notice what it could do. And eventually, we did. The first encounter. Imagine the world, tens of thousands of years ago. A colder planet, rougher, louder, yet strangely peaceful in its own vastness. Tribes moved with the seasons, fires burned in the open air, and the stars felt close enough to touch. Somewhere in Central Asia, near the high plateaus of modern-day Mongolia or Kazakhstan, a small group of travelers gathered around a fire. Their tools were crude, their words few, but their curiosity endless. One of them throws dried plants onto the flames, the stalks of wild hemp, maybe tossed there by accident. The smoke rises, sharp and earthy, curling into the night sky. It's different from the smell of wood sweeter, almost comforting. Someone leans closer. Bradesi and for a fleeting moment, the world seems softer. The firelight glows warmer, the laughter feels lighter, and the stars above somehow feel closer. They do not yet know what they be. Discovered, but this small, nameless moment, a flicker of curiosity beside a fire, will echo across all of human history, because this is the first time, perhaps by accident, that someone smoked cannabis. The plant that watched us grow cannabis didn't just wait to be found. It evolved alongside us. Scientists believe it originated on the high plains of Central Asia, thriving in places where few other plants could survive. Its fibers were strong, its seeds rich with oil, and its slabs full of strange, whispering chemistry. To early humans, hemp was a gift. It could be twisted into rope, woven into cloth, pressed into oil, and eaten as food. And over generations, Asweta met it. It began to tame us. In ancient settlements along the Yellow River in China, archaeologists have found hemp fibers woven into cloth more than 10,000 years old, some of the earliest evidence of human textile making. The plant was already part of our survival. We built with it, wore it, burned it, and, perhaps unknowingly, we dreamed with it too. Smoke, memory, and mystery. It's strange to think about, but fire has always been our teacher. Every discovery humanity made began there, beneath the glow of flames. Cooking, crafting, worship, music, and, in time, smoke. It was around the fires that we began to wonder. When we burned hemp, we noticed something, a change in feeling, a slowing down, a warmth, not from heat, but from within. It wasn't the kind of intoxication that came from fermented fruit or strong drink. This was subtler, calmer, almost sacred. The Scythians of the Eurasian steppes would later perfect this ritual. They built small tents, placed hot stones inside, and threw cannabis seeds onto the embers. Fragrant smoke filled the space. They danced, sang, and shouted in joy. Greek historian Herodotus, writing around 450 BCE, described it himself. The Scythians take the seed of this hemp and, creeping under the felt coverings, throw it upon the red-hot stones. At once it smokes, and they shout for joy. They were not just getting high, they were celebrating life, death, and the spaces between. When archaeologists later uncovered Scythian burial sites, they found gold bowls and incense burners still coated with resin from cannabis, proof that the smoke of that plant was already part of ritual, healing, and farewell. From use to understanding. So when did people truly start smoking weed, not just burning it, but intentionally inhaling it for its effects? Evidence now points to around 2,500 years ago, in the high mountains of western China. In 2019, researchers uncovered a group of tombs at a site called Jizonkel Cemetery. Inside were wooden braziers, filled with stones blackened by fire. And on those stones, chemical traces of THC, the compound that gives cannabis its signature effects. That discovery, the oldest physical evidence of intentional cannabis smoking, confirms what stories and whispers had already told us, that ancient humans weren't just using the plant, they were seeking something through it. Maybe healing, maybe vision, maybe just a moment of calm under a vast, uncertain sky. Smoke is a bridge in nearly every ancient culture. Smoke was sacred. Fire purified, but smoke carried. It rose upward in visible prayers lifted toward unseen gods. So it's no surprise that cannabis, once burned, joined this language of the divine. Its smoke, slow and fragrant, became a bridge between the seen and the unseen. Among early shamans, cannabis was a teacher. Among healers, it was medicine. Among the weary, it was rest. And that sensei of smoke as spirit, of calm, a sacred, would echo from Asia to Africa, from the tents of nomads to the courtyards of kings. Humor and humanity. It's easy to forget that our ancestors were human, curious, impulsive, sometimes funny in their own ways. When we imagine early humans discovering cannabis, we can almost hear the laughter. Someone coughs. Someone laughs harder. Someone says, "The fire smells good tonight." And for a moment, justa momenter is joy without reason, that small miracle of the mind softening, of the world feeling less sharp around the edges. This is how many great things begin by accident, by curiosity, by laughter. The plant that followed us everywhere from that first accidental fire onward. Cannabis began its slow, unstoppable migration. Seeds traveled in the soles of traders' shoes, in the bellies of pack animals, and in the sails of boats that crossed rivers and seas. It reached China, where it became medicine. It reached India, where it became divine. It reached Persia, where it became poetry. And much later, it reached the West, where it became everything from fiber to fear. But at this point in our journey, the story is still pure. A story of discovery, not division. The smoke that rises from those ancient fires is the same smoke that would drift through temples, through battlefields, through bedrooms, through every moment where humans have sought comfort in chaos. It is, in its own way, a form of memory, a reminder that long before we built machines or invented gods, we were simply trying to feel a little less heavy in our own skin. So, when did people start smoking weed? Long before they called it that. Long before they named it medicine or sin. They did it because something in them, that restless, searching part of the human soul, recognized calm when it found it. That night, thousands of years ago, as hemp seeds burned and laughter rose beneath the stars, we began one of the oldest relationships in human history between the earth that grows the plant and the breath that takes it in. The fire burns low now. The embers glow like tiny suns, and as the first smoke curls into the night, humanity takes its first quiet inhale of history. From that first flame, the smoke drifted east into temples, palaces, and the minds of dreamers. In our next chapter, we follow it through the lands of healers, mystics, and kings. Sacred smoke and ancient science. After that first moment when early humans discovered the strange calm of cannabis smoke, The plant began its long journey across continents. Over thousands of years, it would travel on foot, by caravan, and later by ship, finding its way into nearly every civilization on Earth. What started as an accident around a campfire evolved into one of humanity's oldest medicines, one of its most enduring rituals, and one of its most controversial companions. The story of cannabis is not just about intoxication. It's about how people in every age tried to understand the connection between body, mind, and the natural world. Long before modern science, long before chemical analysis or clinical studies, ancient civilizations observed what cannabis could do, how it eased pain, calmed nerves, and changed perception. These early observers didn't think in terms of chemistry. To them, it was spiritual, mysterious, and sometimes divine. The first written record of cannabis as medicine appears in ancient China. According to legend, Emperor Shen, known as the Divine Farmer, Rula Darun, 2800 BC, he is credited with testing hundreds of plants to discover their healing or poisonous effects. Among them was ma, the Chinese word for hemp. Shen Nang's early pharmacopoeia lists cannabis as a treatment for ailments such as rheumatism, malaria, and menstrual pain. It was also believed to contain a spiritual energy that balanced the body's yin and yang. In this early worldview, health wasn't just physical. It was harmony between forces. Cannabis, with its mix of calm and clarity, symbolized that balance. The plant spread quickly across Asia. By 2000 BC, it was known in both medicinal and ritual contexts. Archaeologists have found hemp seeds and fibers in ancient Chinese burial sites, showing that the plant was not only valued for healing but also carried symbolic meaning, a connection between the living and the dead. The burning of hemp was used in funeral rites, suggesting that its smoke represented purification and the transition of the spirit. Further west, in the Indian subcontinent, cannabis took on an even deeper spiritual role. In India, it became known as bangonja and garas, different preparations of the same sacred plant. The Atharva Veda, one of India's oldest religious texts written more than 3,000 years ago, refers to cannabis as one of the 5 sacred plants. It was called a source of happiness and a liberator, a gift from the god Shiva himself. Hindu tradition describes how Lord Shiva once wandered into the mountains, weary and upset. There, he rested beneath a tall cannabis plant. When he awoke, he tasted its leaves and felt renewed, refreshed, and at peace. From that moment, the plant was considered holy. During religious festivals such as Mahashivaratri, devotees drink bhang, a mixture of cannabis, milk, and spices, as an offering to Shiva. It is not seen as a drug, but as a way to connect with the divine, to find mental stillness, and to let go of worldly stress. In India, the plant's effects were carefully observed. Physicians and yogis both recognized its potential to dull pain and heighten focus. It was used to treat fever, dysentery, and anxiety. Unlike the more stimulating substances of later centuries, cannabis was seen as a bridge between the body and the soul. It quieted thoughts without erasing them. In that sense, it was as much a tool for meditation as for medicine. As the centuries passed, cannabis followed the trade routes westward. Through the mountain passes of Afghanistan and Persia, the plant found new meanings and new myths. In the Persian world, cannabis was known by the name bangaward, that would later evolve into bang in India and hashish in Arabic. Ancient Persian texts from the Avesta period describe the use of cannabis in sacred rituals dedicated to the god Mithra. Associated with truth and light, it was believed that the smoke of the plant could open the mind to visions and truth. By around the 1st millennium BC, Persian and Assyrian healers were using cannabis extracts for a range of illnesses. Medical tablets written in cuneiform, the world's first written language, mention hemp as part of remedies for pain, depression, and even epilepsy. The Assyrians called it kubu, a word strikingly similar to cannabis. They used it not only in medicine, but in religious ceremonies, mixing it with wine and incense to create a sense of divine presence. In ancient Persia, smoke had special significance. Fire was sacred in Zoroastrianism, the main religion of the region. The act of burning something, especially a plant, was a way to release its spirit. When cannabis was burned, its smoke was seen as carrying prayers upward. People believed the gods could hear through the rising mist. This idea, smoke as communication, spread throughout the ancient world. By the time Greek traders and travelers encountered Eastern rituals, they were fascinated by the plant's reputation. Greek physicians like Dioscorides and Galen mentioned cannabis in their writings. They noted its ability to relieve pain, reduce inflammation, and calm the stomach. It was not yet widely smoked in the Mediterranean world, but it was recognized as a potent medicine and, in small amounts, a source of relaxation. Across these regions from China to India to Persia, one theme remained constant. Cannabis was respected. It was a plant of both healing and mystery. The idea of inhaling its smoke to alter perception wasn't about recreation. It was about insight. To many, it seemed that cannabis opened the door between the physical and the spiritual. A temporary bridge that allowed people to reflect on the world and themselves. At this point in history, the use of cannabis smoke was still tied closely to ritual. In temples, during funerals, and in healing ceremonies, the burning of the plant represented transformation. It changed from solid to smoke, from matter to spirit. People believed that by breathing it in, they shared in that transformation. It's important to understand how differently ancient people viewed plants compared to us. To them, every plant had a purpose and a personality. Cannabis was gentle but powerful, healing but humbling. It was never seen as evil or forbidden. That change would come much later. In these early civilizations, it was a gift, a companion in both sickness and meditation. The Silk Road would soon carry it even farther. As merchants and mystics moved between East and West, they traded not just goods, but ideas. Cannabis traveled with silk, spices, and stories. Everywhere it went, it adapted, sometimes as medicine, sometimes as incense, sometimes as something to be feared or misunderstood, but it never disappeared. When we look at these ancient societies, a pattern emerges. The act of smoking or burning cannabis was never just about escape. It was about connection. It connected people to gods, to ancestors, to nature, and to each other. For the Chinese farmer, it was a crop. For the Indian monk, it was a sacrament. For the Persian priest, it was a message carried by smoke. In each case, the effect was the same. A temporary silence in the noise of human thought. And that, more than anything, explains why the practice endured. Humanity had found a plant that didn't promise power or wealth, but offered a moment of calm. By the end of the first millennium BC, the map of cannabis use stretched from the Pacific to the Mediterranean. It appeared in healing scrolls, religious hymns, and travelers' tales. The same plant, observed through different eyes, meant 100 different things, yet it always pointed to the same truth: the search for peace. In the next part of its story, cannabis would enter the age of empires. It would pass through golden markets and desert kingdoms, carried by traders and scholars who saw no boundary between science and spirit. And as those empires grew, so too did the legends that surrounded this remarkable plant. Its smoke would mingle with poetry, medicine, and myth, shaping a new chapter in the long human conversation between curiosity and control. Empires, trade, and the spread of smoke. As centuries passed, the world began to grow smaller. Paths that were once isolated became connected by trade, migration, and conquest. Out of Asia came silk, paper, and spices. And among those goods, often hidden in sacks or stored with herbs, traveled something lighter, a plant whose scent lingered long after the caravans were gone. Cannabis has started to make its way around the world, gaining popularity and recognition in various cultures and societies. It's fascinating to see how this plant, once stigmatized, is now being embraced for its medicinal properties, recreational use, and potential economic benefits. People everywhere are beginning to explore its various forms, from oils and edibles to traditional smoking methods, and the conversation around cannabis is evolving rapidly. Isn't it interesting how something so ancient is finding a fresh place in our modern lives? It moved first with nomads, the Scythians, Sarmatians, and other horse-borne tribes who roamed the Eurasian steppes. They were among the earliest to use cannabis not only for rope and cloth, but as part of ritual life. They carried it in pouches, burned it during funerals, and inhaled its smoke as a way to commune with the spirits of their ancestors. When they moved westward into the lands of Persia and south toward India, they brought both the seed and the practice of burning it. By around 500 BC, Persia had become one of the great crossroads of civilization. Under the Achaemenid Empire, trade stretched from the Indus Valley to the Mediterranean. Caravans carried gold, textiles, and rare plants, including the cannabis that grew abundantly in Central Asia. In Persian marketplaces, dried hemp was sold alongside saffron and frankincense. Physicians used its oils to treat wounds and infections. Priests burned it during ceremonies dedicated to Ahura Mazda, the god of creation. Persian scholars began to describe the plant in more detail. They observed its calming and sometimes euphoric effects. Some associated it with insight. Others warned that too much smoke clouded the mind. This was one of the earliest recorded debates over cannabis, whether it was a tool for wisdom or a temptation for excess. It was never banned, but it was treated with caution, as something to be used deliberately and with respect. The Persian Empire eventually gave way to new powers, the Greeks and then the Romans. When Alexander the Great's armies marched east in the 4th century BC, they encountered cannabis in Bactria and the soldiers returned home with stories of people who purified themselves with fire and strange herbs. Greek writers such as Herodotus and later Theophrastus took note. They described hemp's industrial uses, but also its curious ability to produce laughter. Though smoking was not yet common in the Mediterranean, the concept of inhaling plant fumes for spiritual or medical purposes was well understood. Meanwhile, farther east, the Silk Road was taking shape, a vast web of trade routes connecting China, India, Persia, Arabia, and the Roman world. It was more than a path for goods. It was a highway for ideas. Through it moved philosophies, technologies, religions, and quietly, the customs of cannabis. Travelers carried seeds wrapped in cloth or pressed into oil. Monks and merchants shared them in temples and taverns. Over time, cannabis became part of everyday life across Asia and the Middle East. In China, it remained a medicinal plant. In India, it stayed sacred. In Persia and Arabia, it transformed again, this time into something entirely new. Hashish. The term hashish actually comes from the Arabic word hashisha, which translates to grass or herb. It specifically refers to the concentrated resin that's gathered from cannabis flowers. Unlike burning whole plants, this preparation could be smoked or eaten in small amounts. It was stronger, more portable, and ideal for travelers. By the 9th century AD, hashish had become part of daily life in many Islamic societies. It was used by scholars, poets, and ordinary workers alike. In the bustling city of Baghdad, the intellectual center of the Islamic Golden Age, medical texts described cannabis as a sedative, a pain reliever, and a mood enhancer. Physicians such as Al-Ruzq and Avicenna discussed its effects on digestion and anxiety. They understood that it could ease suffering, though they warned against excess. Baghdad in that era was a city of knowledge. Libraries, observatories, and hospitals flourished under the Abbasid caliphs. Scholars from every corner of the empire gathered to translate Greek, Persian, and Indian works. It was here that scientific medicine began to take shape, and within those same walls, cannabis was studied with curiosity rather than fear. At the same time, cannabis was also moving into culture. Poets wrote about it in allegories. Musicians compared its calm to the stillness before prayer. In some circles, it became a social custom, a way to relax after long study or labor. Not everyone approved. Religious authorities debated whether the plant's intoxicating effects violated Islamic law. Alcohol was clearly forbidden, but cannabis was not mentioned in the Quran. This uncertainty gave rise to controversy that still echoes centuries later. Some clerics condemned hashish as a distraction from faith. Others saw it as harmless compared to wine. From this debate emerged one of the most persistent legends in cannabis history, the story of the Hashishin, or assassins. According to medieval chroniclers, a sect of mountain warriors in Persia used hashish to inspire visions and courage before carrying out secret missions. Western crusaders brought the tale back to Europe, where the word assassin entered the language. Modern historians, however, view the story as largely myth. The sect did exist, a branch of the Nazarius Malis, led by Hassan I Saba. But there is little evidence that they used hashish in their rituals. The legend was likely spread by their enemies to discredit them. Still, it shows how powerful the idea of cannabis had become. A substance mysterious enough to fuel both devotion and fear. Through the Middle Ages, cannabis continued to move with merchants and scholars. Along North Africa's coast, Berber tribes cultivated it in mountain valleys. In Egypt, it became part of urban culture. By the 13th century, Cairo's coffee houses offered not only music and conversation but also small clay pipes for smoking hashish. Travelers described these gatherings as peaceful and philosophical, a contrast to the rowdy taverns of Europe. From Egypt, the practice spread to the Ottoman Empire, Istanbul, Damascus, and Aleppo. Each developed their own customs. In some places, people preferred to eat hashish mixed with honey or fruit. In others, they smoked it through water pipes, an early form of the hookah. Despite periodic bans, the habit persisted, too deeply rooted in social life to disappear. While the East was refining its relationship with cannabis, Europe was still largely unaware of its psychoactive potential. There, hemp remained a crop for rope, sails, and fabric. The same plant that provided calm in Persian gardens powered the ships that would one day explore the Atlantic. It was not yet a drug in the European mind. It was a material, a tool, that would change only after new global connections formed. By the 15th and 16th centuries, explorers and traders began to cross oceans. The movement of people and plants accelerated beyond anything the ancient world had known. Cannabis sailed west with colonists and east with missionaries. It adapted to new climates, new languages, and new laws. Everywhere it went, it carried both its usefulness and its mystery. Looking back, the period between 500 BC and 1500 AD was when cannabis truly became global. It bridged empires and religions, surviving changes that destroyed kingdoms and erased languages. It was traded by caravans, discussed by philosophers, and whispered about by rulers. In that long span, smoking cannabis, or inhaling its vapor, became both a ritual and a habit, both sacred and ordinary. What is remarkable is how consistently it represented the same things across cultures. It was always tied to calm, reflection, and relief. Whether in the tents of the Scythians or the gardens of Baghdad, people sought from it the same simple gift: a quieter mind. By the dawn of the modern age, cannabis had become part of the human story everywhere it could grow. The next stage of its journey would carry it westward into Europe's courts, colonies, and laboratories, where it would be redefined once again, this time under the gaze of science and law. Smoke under silken roofs. Cannabis in the West. Cannabis had made its way across thousands of miles by the time the Middle Ages wrapped up. It had been burned in tents, praised in temples, debated in palaces, and traded across deserts. But there was one part of the world where its smoke had not yet found a home: Europe. In the West, cannabis had been known for centuries, but not for its mind-altering qualities. Europeans saw it as a tough, useful crop, a plant that gave them fiber for ropes, sails, and clothing. It was the backbone of maritime life. Without hemp, the great ships of Venice, Spain, and England would not have sailed. Every rope, every net, and every sail that crossed the oceans was made from the same plant that, elsewhere in the world, people burned for spiritual calm. This difference in perception was striking. In Asia, cannabis had long been linked to the mind and the spirit. In Europe, it was tied to labor and trade. The same leaf that made Persian poets dream fueled the age of exploration. But as contact between East and West increased, so did curiosity. When traders, diplomats, and scholars from Europe began to travel through the Ottoman Empire and beyond, they encountered the custom of smoking cannabis and hashish. Some were intrigued. Others were disturbed. They wrote about the strange, intoxicating herbs of the East, describing people who appeared calm, detached, even joyful. To European readers, unfamiliar with such practices, these stories sounded both exotic and dangerous. By the late 1500s, European herbalists began to record what they had learned. In 1545, the German botanist Leonhard Fuchs wrote about hemp's medicinal uses, noting its ability to ease pain and induce sleep. Later, in 1621, the English scholar Robert Burden mentioned cannabis in the Anatomy of Melancholy, suggesting it could help relieve sadness. These were among the first European references to the plant. psychological effects, a faint echo of what Asia had known for thousands of years. Still, smoking cannabis was almost unknown in Europe. Tobacco had just arrived from the Americas, and it captured the continent's attention completely. The new habit of smoking tobacco spread faster than any previous cultural trend. For most Europeans, if smoke offered comfort or clarity, it came from a tobacco pipe, not from cannabis. Yet quietly, in the background, knowledge of cannabis as a medicine continued to grow. During the 18th century, European doctors working in colonial territories, especially in India and North Africa, observed local uses of the plant. They saw it prescribed for pain, fever, insomnia, and even mental disorders. Many were surprised by its effectiveness. One of the most influential figures in this rediscovery was an Irish physician named William Brooke. In the 1830s, while working for the British East India Company in Calcutta, he studied Indian medical traditions. He noticed that cannabis was widely used in both religious and medical contexts. Local healers prepared it as tinctures and pastes to treat conditions ranging from muscle spasms to epilepsy. O'Shaughnessy decided to test it scientifically. His results were remarkable. He documented the plant's ability to relieve pain, stimulate appetite, and reduce convulsions. He also noted that overdoses were not fatal, a crucial difference from many Western medicines of the time. When he returned to Britain, he brought samples and published his findings. His reports caused a sensation. For the first time, cannabis entered Western medicine as a recognized treatment. By the mid-19th century, extracts and tinctures of cannabis were available in pharmacies across Europe and North America. They were sold as pain relievers, sleep aids, and anti-nausea remedies. Doctors prescribed them for conditions as varied as migraines, menstrual cramps, and depression. The plant's image changed. In the East, it had been sacred. In the West, it became scientific. Yet its smoke still carried mystery. Some European artists and writers, inspired by tales of the Middle East, began to explore cannabis's effects firsthand. In the 1840s, a group of Parisian intellectuals known as Le Club des Hachiciens, the Club of the Hachicitas, met regularly to experiment with the plant. Members included writers like Victor Hugo, Alexandre Dumas, and Charles Baudelaire. They gathered in dimly lit rooms, tasting small portions of hashish mixed into sweet confections. Their goal was not escape, but exploration. To understand how the mind changed under its influence. Baudelaire later described his experiences in essays that balanced fascination and caution. He wrote that cannabis could exalt the imagination but warned that it might also dull the will. His reflections reveal the growing Western tension between curiosity and fear, a theme that would define the plant's future in the modern world. While intellectuals experimented in salons, governments and industries focused on hemp's material value. During the 1800s, European navies relied heavily on hemp for ropes and rigging. Fields of it covered the landscapes of England, France, and Russia. It was an essential crop, considered patriotic, to cultivate. The idea that it might also be an intoxicant remained largely unknown among ordinary people. That began to change with the rise of global trade. As colonial empires expanded, soldiers, sailors, and laborers encountered local customs of cannabis use. In Egypt, British troops observed hashish smoking among workers. In India, they saw the same practice they had once studied in laboratories, but now through the lens of control and suspicion. By the late 19th century, European powers had shifted from curiosity to regulation. In 1877, British authorities in India commissioned the Indian Hemp Drugs Commission report, one of the most detailed studies of cannabis ever conducted. It examined the social, medical, and economic effects of the plant across the subcontinent. The report concluded that moderate use caused little harm and that prohibition would be unnecessary and unfair. However, that conclusion did not prevent the growing unease in Western politics. As the 20th century approached, moral attitudes hardened. The same Western nations that had once distributed cannabis in medicine bottles began to question its place in society. Part of this shift was scientific. Chemistry advanced rapidly, and new drugs such as morphine and aspirin appeared. Cannabis, difficult to standardize and slower in effect, began to lose favor in the medical field. But part of the shift was cultural. The association of cannabis with non-Western peoples, with colonized nations and exotic customs, made it an easy target for moral campaigns. By the early 1900s, newspapers in both Europe and the United States began to print sensational stories about dangerous hashish and marijuana madness. The same plant that had once soothed pharaohs and poets was now portrayed as a threat to order and decency. Western governance began to restrict its trade and study. It is important to remember that this transformation did not happen overnight. For thousands of years, cannabis had been a respected ally of humanity, used responsibly, studied carefully, and woven into culture. But as it entered the age of empire, it became entangled in politics, economics, and fear. The irony was that the West rediscovered cannabis precisely at the moment it was beginning to forget how to see plants as partners. Industrialization had changed the way people thought about nature. The same world that once found harmony in smoke and soil now divided things into categories useful or dangerous, productive or prohibited. Yet even as official attitudes darkened, the plant itself endured. Hemp continued to grow in fields across Europe and America. Hashish remained popular in North Africa and the Middle East. And among scientists, interest in its chemistry persisted quietly. By the early 20th century, cannabis had reached every continent. It had been praised and condemned, studied and outlawed. It had built ships, inspired poetry, and sparked debates that crossed centuries. And still, it grew indifferent to laws and labels, waiting for humanity to understand it again. As the 1900s unfolded, the story of cannabis entered its most turbulent phase. Governments would soon criminalize it, scientists would rediscover it, and societies would fight over it. But before that storm began, the plant had already done something remarkable. It had linked the ancient and modern worlds, from Chinese healers to British chemists, from Indian mystics to Parisian writers. Cannabis had shown that across cultures and eras, humans had always been drawn to the same quiet truth that calm is a form of knowledge and reflection a kind of strength. Government, guilt, and the green leaf by the beginning of the 20th century. Cannabis had circled the globe. It had served as medicine, fiber, sacrament, and social custom. But now, it was about to enter a new age. One shaped not by farmers or physicians, but by governments, bureaucracies, and fear. For thousands of years, cannabis had been a plant of balance, used responsibly, understood within context. But the modern world was changing fast. Empires were collapsing, industrial nations were rising, and with that came new anxieties about morality, control, and identity. And in that changing world, the green leaf that once symbolized peace became a symbol of rebellion. The first wave of restrictions began quietly. In the early 1900s, Western powers extended their influence across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. In colonial territories, officials often viewed local traditions, including the use of cannabis and hashish, as backward or dangerous. They didn't see centuries of ritual and medicine. They saw a difference, and difference was something they wanted to manage. In 1913, Egypt, under British control, issued one of the first modern bans on hashish. Officials claimed it caused laziness and moral decay. In reality, it was a way to enforce Western norms on a population with its own values. Similar actions followed in other colonies. The pattern was the same. Western rulers linked cannabis to the people they governed, not to themselves. By criminalizing the plant, they reinforced social hierarchy. Back in Europe and America, another kind of anxiety was spreading, the fear of At the turn of the century, movements for temperance were gaining momentum. They had begun as campaigns against alcohol, but soon expanded to all substances that altered the mind. Governments discovered that drugs were more than a health issue. They were a tool of power. In 1906, the United States passed the Pure Food and Drug Act, requiring medicine labels to list ingredients like opium or cannabis. It was the first small step toward regulation. Then came the Hague Convention of 1912, an international treaty designed to control narcotics such as opium and cocaine. Cannabis wasn't a major focus yet. It was too common. Nobiso masalana, kalenda. Bing menja focus. More fully understood. But that would change after World War I. The 1920s and 1930s were decades of cultural upheaval. Jazz, cinema, and new forms of freedom began to challenge old moral codes. In this atmosphere, cannabis found a new home among artists, laborers, and immigrants. In the United States, the plant was introduced largely by Mexican workers who brought their traditional marijuana with them. After the Mexican Revolution, African-American jazz musicians also adopted it, calling it muggles or gauge, using it to relax and create. Their music spread across cities like New Orleans, Chicago, and New York, and with it, cannabis gained a new image. But that image quickly became racial. To the political establishment, cannabis was no longer just a plant. It was tied to outsiders, to immigrants, minorities, and social rebels. And in a society still divided by race and class, it was an easy target. The campaign against cannabis began not as science, but as propaganda. In 1930, the U.S. government created the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, led by Harry Anslinger was a skilled bureaucrat and a master of media influence. He understood that public fear was more powerful than evidence. With no real data, he launched a nationwide crusade, claiming that marijuana caused insanity, violence, and crime. He supplied newspapers with sensational stories. Murders supposedly committed under the influence of marijuana, assaults blamed on reefer madness. Most were exaggerated or fabricated, but they served their purpose. In 1937, the U.S. Congress passed the Marijuana Tax Act, effectively banning the plant nationwide. It wasn't just prohibition, it was erasure. The same country that had once sold cannabis tinctures in pharmacies now criminalized possession entirely. This American fear campaign spread abroad. As the United States grew in political influence, its drug policies shaped international law. In 1925, the Geneva Convention on Opium and Other Drugs had already begun to include cannabis in global control efforts. By mid-century, it was fully classified as a dangerous narcotic. During the 1950s, the United Nations created the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, a treaty that still defines international drug policy today. Under its terms, cannabis was placed in the strictest category, alongside heroin. This decision ignored thousands of years of cultural history and scientific nuance. It was based on politics, not on evidence. The effects were far-reaching across Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Nations aligned with Western powers were pressured to outlaw the plant. Entire industries vanished. Farmers who had grown hemp for generations lost their livelihoods. In some countries, possession of even small amounts became punishable by death. Meanwhile, research virtually stopped. For decades, scientists who tried to study cannabis faced funding cuts and legal obstacles. Its medicinal uses, once widely accepted, were dismissed as superstition. A plant that had served humanity for millennia was now condemned as an enemy of progress. And yet, the story didn't end there. The 1960s brought a global shift. Young people, disillusioned with war and conformity, began to question authority. They rediscovered cannabis not as poison, but as a symbol of peace, creativity, and resistance. In music, art, and protests, the green leaf returned not as medicine or ritual, but as rebellion. Governments responded harshly. The war on drugs, declared in the early 1970s, turned cannabis into a political weapon. Police arrests soared. Entire communities, especially minorities, were targeted under harsh drug laws. Billions were spent, but the plant itself remained unchanged, still growing quietly in fields and forests, still doing what it had always done. For decades, the narrative was one of conflict. Governments versus nature, law versus culture. But beneath the surface, something else was happening. In laboratories and hospitals, scientists began to revisit cannabis, asking questions that had been silenced for half a century. They rediscovered its chemical complexity, especially compounds like THC and CBD, which interact with the body's own endocannabinoid system. This discovery, made in the 1990s, revealed that the human body naturally produces similar molecules, suggesting that our connection to this plant is biological, not accidental. As research advanced, the old myths began to crumble. Patients with chronic pain, epilepsy, and cancer found relief where other treatments failed. Doctors in some countries pushed for reform. Slowly, one nation after another began to reconsider its laws. By the 21st century, cannabis had entered a new phase, from global prohibition to cautious acceptance. Still, the shadow of fear remains. Even today, in many parts of the world, people are imprisoned for possession. Centuries of stigma cannot be undone overnight. But the story of cannabis shows something remarkable about humanity. Our tendency to fear what we don't control, and to rediscover what we once forgot. Governments once saw cannabis as a threat to order, but history suggests the opposite. From ancient shamans to modern doctors, people have always turned to it for understanding, not chaos. It is not the plant that changed. It is us. We built systems that separated science from spirit, medicine from morality, and people from nature. And cannabis, quietly, revealed that those divisions were never real. When we trace the plant's path through time from sacred smoke to criminal code, we see a mirror of ourselves. Every era projects its fears and hopes onto it. In ancient China, it symbolized healing. In India, devotion. In Persia, insight. In modern politics, guilt. But guilt is temporary. History always moves back toward balance. The same curiosity that first led humans to toss hemp into the fire thousands of years ago still lives within us. It is the same curiosity that now drives research, reform, and rediscovery. The war against the green leaf has lasted less than a century, a brief moment compared to the 10,000 years of coexistence before it. If history teaches anything, it is that truth eventually outlives fear. As this chapter closes, we can see the pattern clearly. Each age defines cannabis according to its values. For ancient farmers, it was survival. For mystics, enlightenment. For scientists, medicine. And for modern governments, controversy. But the plant remains what it has always been, a companion of humanity, growing silently in the background, waiting for reason to catch up with memory. Dust and echoes, the leaf, the smoke, the memory. Every story eventually turns back towards silence. The fires fade, the smoke drifts upward, and what remains are memories, not only of what happened, but of what we learned. The story of cannabis is not a simple one. It is the story of how humanity has always searched for calm, for relief, for understanding, and how that search has never been free from misunderstanding. Today, when people speak about cannabis, the conversation is divided. Some call it medicine. Others call it a threat. Some see freedom in its smoke. Others see danger. But beneath the modern debates, beneath laws and arguments, the plant itself is the same one that grew beside ancient rivers 10,000 years ago. Its leaves have not changed. Only our view of them has. For most of human history, cannabis existed without controversy. It grew in the corners of fields and near the edges of villages. It was woven into ropes, pressed into oil, brewed into tonics, and burned in rituals. It followed humanity across continents, shaping economies and cultures. From China's earliest medical scrolls to India's sacred hymns, from Persia's poetry to Egypt's incense, the plant was part of daily life, familiar, respected, and understood. Then came the modern world, with its industries, borders, and rules. In our attempt to organize everything, we turned even nature into categories, legal and illegal, useful and dangerous. Cannabis, once simply a plant, became a symbol in a moral struggle that had little to do with science or health. Yet, as the 20th century ended, a quiet reversal began. In laboratories and hospitals, researchers returned to the question that ancient physicians had already asked. What exactly does this plant do? Using advanced tools, they began to uncover the body's own system of chemical communication, a network of receptors and molecules called the endocannabinoid system. It regulates pain, mood, appetite, and sleep. And the compounds in cannabis such as THC and CBD fit perfectly into this system. like keys designed for locks that have existed inside us all along. This discovery changed everything. It revealed that the connection between humans and cannabis was not merely cultural or historical. It was biology. We may. For the first time, science confirmed what intuition and tradition had long suggested, that the plant interacts with us on a level deeper than thought. It does not force the body to act. It encourages it to balance itself. In that sense, it behaves exactly as ancient healers once believed. It restores harmony. During the early 21st century, countries began to reconsider their stance. Medical cannabis programs emerged in places once known for strict prohibition: Canada, Germany, Israel, parts of the United States. Doctors prescribed it for pain, for epilepsy, for anxiety. Researchers explored its potential in treating cancer symptoms, post-traumatic stress, and neurodegenerative diseases. Gradually, the language around it changed. Words like addiction and vice gave way to terms like treatment and therapy. The shift was not universal. Many nations still maintained harsh penalties, and international treaties continued to classify cannabis as a narcotic. But the global conversation had begun to evolve. People started to ask whether decades of punishment had done more harm than the plant itself. They questioned why a natural substance, used safely for thousands of years, had been criminalized while more dangerous chemicals remained legal. In the early 2010s, something extraordinary happened. Public opinion changed faster than anyone expected. Activists, patients, and scientists worked together, sharing stories of recovery and relief. Videos of children with severe epilepsy responding to cannabis-derived oils reached millions online. These were not abstractions or political arguments. They were real lives improved by a plant once branded as evil. By the mid-2020s, cannabis was legal in various forms across dozens of countries. In North America, entire economies formed around it. In Europe, debates over regulation replaced old fears. In Asia and Africa, where its history ran deepest, governments slowly reopened research programs that had been silent for generations. The smoke that once rose in secrecy now appeared in laboratories, measured and analyzed rather than condemned. What emerged from this rediscovery was not a return to ancient mysticism or blind acceptance, but a more mature understanding. Cannabis was not a miracle cure, but neither was it a menace. It was a tool, powerful, complex, and deserving of respect. It could heal or harm, depending on how it was used, and that, perhaps, is the oldest truth of all. Across time, the plant has mirrored humanity's own nature. It reflects our curiosity, our contradictions, and our desire to find peace in a chaotic world. It has been both friend and foe, medicine and myth, celebrated and banned. And in that duality, it tells a story not just about itself, but about us. When ancient shamans threw hemp on their fires, they were not breaking laws. They were exploring the unknown. When Indian priests mixed bhang for their festivals, they were seeking connection. When scientists isolated THC in 1964, they were continuing the same search, a search for understanding. Through every stage, the motivation remained the same: to make sense of what we feel, and to ease the burdens that come with being human. Looking back, it is clear that fear has always played a larger role than fact. The campaign that criminalized cannabis in the 20th century was built on misunderstanding, prejudice, and politics. But the centuries of human experience that preceded it cannot be erased. The plant's story is longer than any law, older than any nation, and wider than any single interpretation. Now, as the world slowly reopens its mind to the green leaf, a quiet reconciliation is underway. Governments that once punished farmers are now issuing cultivation licenses. Pharmaceutical companies that once ignored the plant are investing millions to study it. Patients who once hid their treatment now speak openly. Step humanity is rediscovering what it once knew: that nature and knowledge are not enemies, but partners. Still, even in this new era, the past lingers. The shadow of stigma remains in many places. and millions of people continue to face punishment for possession. The global drug war, built on fear rather than evidence, has left scars that will take generations to heal. But healing, like growth, begins slowly. One seed, one law, one story at a time. What lessons can be drawn from this long history? Perhaps the most important is humility. For all our science and progress, it took us thousands of years to understand what our ancestors already sensed. Cannabis was never the problem. Misunderstanding was. When fear replaced curiosity, we lost not only a plant, but also a piece of wisdom about ourselves. The ability to seek calm without shame. The rediscovery of cannabis is, in many ways, the rediscovery of balance. As the modern world races forward, the plant stands as a reminder that peace often grows quietly in the background. It does not demand attention. It simply exists, waiting to be noticed. It reminds us that rest, reflection, and healing are not luxuries, but necessities. Today, researchers continue to explore its properties. Chemists isolate new cannabinoids. Doctors test new therapies. Farmers cultivate strains designed for specific purposes, some to relieve pain, others to ease anxiety or improve sleep. The plant that once traveled in secret across the Silk Road now moves legally across borders in labeled containers. It has entered the modern age, carrying with it the memory of all the civilizations that once held it sacred. And yet, the heart of its story remains unchanged. It is still the same green leaf that burned in ancient fires. It still releases the same thin smoke that carried prayers to the sky. Whether used for meditation in India, medicine in China, poetry in Persia, or relaxation in a modern city apartment, its essence is the same. Calm, connection, continuity. History rarely offers full circles, but this story comes close. After millennia of discovery, suppression, and rediscovery, cannabis has returned to its original role, a companion to human reflection. It teaches patience through its growth, humility through its endurance, and peace through its effect. As we look back across time, the image is clear: a fire in the dark, a group of early humans gathered around it, a few dried leaves tossed onto the flames, a strange, soothing scent rising into the air, a pause, a breath, and in that breath, the beginning of an unbroken connection between humankind and a simple plant. That connection has survived wars, empires, and laws. It has crossed deserts and oceans. It has endured fear and rediscovery, and it continues today, wherever people seek comfort in something natural, gentle, and older than history itself. The smoke eventually fades, but its memory remains drifting quietly through time, reminding us of who we were and who we still are. The leaf, the smoke, the memory. And now, dear listener, our journey through the ages draws to a quiet close. From ancient fires to modern laboratories, we've watched the story of cannabis unfold. A story not of rebellion, but of reflection. Across empires and centuries, through misunderstanding and rediscovery, the same plant has followed humanity, teaching us the same quiet lesson, that peace, in all its forms, often grows from the simplest roots. Thank you for spending this time with us here on Go to Sleep Historian. If this story helped you relax, learn, or drift a little closer to sleep, please remember to subscribe, like, and share our videos. Your support helps us keep telling these calm journeys through time, where history doesn't shout, it whispers. Until next time, may your night be peaceful, your dreams steady, and your thoughts light as smoke rising through the dark.